And we're live, or actually recording at this time. So, welcome, guys. We've got another episode of Enter the Matrix. This time, continuing the road to WTC, but we can call it road after the WTC at this point, because we've got with myself John Lennon and Pumba, respectively from Team USA in Poland, where from what I gather, you guys were responsible to some extent for the pairings within the team. You were like part of the pairing team in both of your teams. So, what we're trying to do in this episode is to get into that one. I still get an echo, I think, from Pumba. Uh, but anyway, what I was saying is that I will still try to find and explain how the round between USA and Poland has gone, because that one was, I think, the most tense round I've had to survive and endure throughout the whole tournament. And I think this is very interesting to see because out of all the matchups, I think this was one of those where it wasn't a case of both teams being very confident about matchups. And like both teams were quite close on it, weren't feeling like they will win by a huge margin. They were feeling more about the drawish matchup, even losing matchup, rather than being cocky when you end up at WTC with both teams being very satisfied with their pairing process. And then they both know that one of them will find out that they were wrong. So now I've done my introduction. How are you doing, John?
I am fantastic. Really good to be on the show here. It's a nice Monday morning here, and I'm very awake.
Good to hear. Pumba, are you awake after a day of work or not very much
Yeah,
so?
I'm good, but I'm actually like midday at my work currently because my work schedule right now is pretty hectic. But
Okay.
overall, pretty good.
So, without further ado, how we'll do it is like in previous episodes when we were discussing pairings, we'll not give both teams to try and discuss every step of the pairings. I want to show one point of view and then the other point of view, and afterwards we'll discuss what was the difference. You guys can get into the conversation. Obviously, you can give some insights, you can give some comments, but like I do not want to get into very in-depth conversation about this one specific estimation because I find it pointless at this point, and it can impact the further explanation of the pairing. So with that in mind, John, I'll take you first for an explanation. For those listening on podcast feeds, I've just shared on my screen the estimations of Team USA. So if you are listening on podcasts and want to see how all of it looks, please go to the YouTube video because there is no way we're gonna go through all of it and remember. But now seeing it, John, what was your approach to doing the estimations? Like, can you get us a little bit involved into the tables, how they work? What's your estimation policy? How do you do this?
Yeah, so our policy going in, so just to kind of start off, the pairings team for USA was myself as well as Sean Naden and Eric Forsman. So even though I'm the only one on the show, I can't take full credit for all of the victories and mistakes that we made in pairings. But our process going into the event was to lead with a defender custodes. But our general thought process in the USA is usually to take the first two rounds, the first two sets of defenders, and try to keep it even or small advantage. We're not going for huge wins in the opening, and we try to get a favorable scrum out of it. That's normally what we go for. That's certainly what we prefer to do. We usually feel confident that we can use our armies, our knowledge of pairings, our players, etc., to mitigate the heavy hitters of the opponent team. So anytime early on in the pairings, we have a chance to pull out whoever we perceive to be a heavy hitter, be that their Eldar player or the player that we know to be their best, depending on the round and the team we're facing. We may do that just for a chance to really soften up the scrum so that we can feast in the scrum is a lot of our philosophy.
So by scrum, you mean the last four pairings in 8?
Exactly. Yep. Yeah. In an 8-man pairings, the third defender, and then the refusal and the forgotten, all of that combined, we refer to as the scrum. Okay. We just do first defender, second defender, scrum is how we think about the different stages of pairings.
Fair. And when you look at your estimations, you guys have something different compared to, for example, what I've seen in Netherlands, US, England, or Poland. You have some kind of average scores marked for armies. This is, I assume, some way of you guys, when looking at a given pairing and a given team, a way of measuring how effective given army is and how much you can prey on it, or how bad you can bust one of your armies, something like that. Just another metric.
Exactly. So we try to keep as many, metrics in there as possible just to give us more information. A big part of our philosophy on Team USA as well is that all 8 members should be willing to be a sacrifice at any point in time. Doesn't matter if we think they're one of our best players, if we think they're on one of our best armies, if the pairings team thinks that the situation calls for it, they should be ready to step into a bad matchup and accept it. And sometimes, for example, let's say we're trying to mitigate an Eldar player and we're looking at, well, we can try to beat this Eldar player or we can try to take a little bit less damage. And so we will take into account how someone is going to do into the rest of the team before we offer them up as a sacrifice. In Team USA, we call this policy taking out the trash, where if someone is bad into a team or in a round or in a mission, we will intentionally toss them to the wolves if we think that we can use it to our advantage later on. So if someone has a very bad average score, we will happily make that person play the Eldar rather than someone who has a good average score.
Fair, makes sense. In this case, you guys have very similar color coding to what we've done in previous episodes.
Mhm.
So you guys used like the tiers or like breaks of essentially 5 points, 4 or 5 points, where you have the drawish matchups between 8 and 12, small like guaranteed wins, but like 10 plus wins, and those higher wins, which are like 13, 14 plus.
Mhm.
And then also losses goes to 3 to 8 points, and losses, like huge losses, at best getting a 5. And also you include roll-offs or like swingy matchups. So say, for example, sometimes, I don't know, Eldar Mirror can be very role dependent, as we can see on your estimation table here.
Mhm.
So this is very similar to what was done previously. And from Anthony said, and what I can see, you guys even included Booyah in your colors, or it's just Anthony
Theoretically.
joking? Well,
Yeah, I was about to say this color coding, or especially the comments near them, seem very. Yeah, I recognize those.
Yes, we did in fact. I'm pretty sure Anthony got it from you all during Alpine Cup, I want to say.
yeah.
But yeah, Anthony brought over this system to replace the old one, because we thought that color coding would make it easier for some of our prospect team when we were doing our team selection earlier on in the pairing, because we had a lot of players who weren't used to playing team format, and we kind of had to onboard them. And he thought that going to colors would be easier than numbers. I'm a math guy; I prefer numbers, but the color process works fine. So I just pick my number and then go pick the color that corresponds to it.
Fair. Okay, so now, anything specific before we get into the pairing process? Anything you guys saw here looking at the table? Because from the side, knowing that this not purple, like pink color usually means that this is a drawish matchup. This table looks like you have few wins, but few very bad losses,
Mhm.
and a lot of draws. Like my brain trying to, it looks very even in terms of distribution of wins and losses, but there's one problem, that most of your wins are against one army. So this usually indicates a quite heavy problem during pairings,
Mhm.
because suddenly after that army is gone, you suddenly do not have many
Yep.
other point like armies to get points against. So anything you saw here?
There's a couple kind of things to consider with this matrix. We definitely looked at this as a very negative matrix for us. We tend to be a little bit conservative in our predictions, but then also we acknowledged that we thought that Poland was the team that matched up the most difficult for us. We going into the event, we thought that this was our worst matrix basically. The one thing I'll say about that giant line of purple next to your Dark Angels is that I think a lot of our guys didn't know what to make of it, unfortunately. And that purple was them saying, I don't really know how it's going to go. It might be a draw, it might not be. It might be a win, it might not be, which is unfortunately not very good data. So we knew that in the pairing process that the column of purple for the Dark Angels was a little shakier than a literal everyone's going to draw it. I knew that some people would be over that, some people would be under that, and I didn't know which was which.
Yeah. And this is a great example of even one of the best teams in the world will have no clue what a certain army does, because you do not have time to get into that one niche army that has been brought by only one team. You just do not have resources to play test into it, especially when you don't know which mission you will play. And if you do not have a dedicated player that can learn that army, they will not also play that army to a good enough level to give you worthwhile testing. So sometimes it might be even better to not play that matchup, to not give you a bad idea of how to play. But having that in mind, what was your idea with doing the first round of pairings, or anything else you might want to add?
The one other thing that I'll add is that I'll comment specifically on my numbers, which is that going into WTC, we had initially planned on a world where I was going to be the first defender very often out the gates. And so a lot of my colors were representative of what is your score if you get to choose the table. I'm not confident of that green into Eldar on every table, but I was confident in it if I chose the table early. With that said, we ended up changing our process about halfway through the tournament anyways, and I became a more of a scrum player than I became, and I wasn't first defending anymore into quite a lot of teams. But going into the event, Poland was actually the only team that we had already decided I would not first defend into, because you had two unique matchups that I did not want. And therefore, we were kind of looking for what our first defender would be and feeling that out for the rest of the tournament as we prepared for the out-of-bracket rounds.
Okay.
I actually have a small question here. Does this particular exact table represent a mission that we are going to play?
No, it does
already?
not.
Okay.
We made this pairings table irrespective of the rounds because we didn't know. And then, basically for the second game of the day where you don't know the round, we didn't do it. For the ones where we knew the round, we would go in and update the table. For this one, we talked a little bit about what the mission was and kind of what the dynamic of it was in our little lunch meeting. And then we basically just told our players, hey, this is the mission. This is how it works. Be aware that this is kind of how it's going to feel different from a normal mission. If you think that changes any of your matchups, look through it real quick, let us know, put the change in. But we didn't fill this out initially with the understanding of this is the round that we're going to play them in.
So there are some changes that reflect the mission that is played, I assume.
Yeah, so I think a couple people put in a few changes as they saw appropriate. I didn't end up making any changes because I consider the mission to be relatively positive for Custodes. So I figured I'd take the upside where I got it, but it didn't make any of my matchups worse. But at least one of our matchups got a lot worse because of this mission, which I'm sure we'll talk about in the pairing process.
Okay, so you guys defended with orcs, from what I recall, and Poland defended with Necrons, as they did nearly the whole event.
It's incredible that they rolled the same number each time on the D8.
And in this case, what was your reasoning behind the orcs round one?
We were looking for someone who we could defend with and wasn't very important at a particular stage of the round, but then also that person could get us guaranteed some value. And we went with Lucas's orcs because even though he has 2 reds, he has no orange matchups. And you don't want to get your defender into something that is both not good for them and could spiral, and also isn't something that's scary to the rest of the team. That's the worst case scenario. So we looked at it as Lucas has 2 matchups that we want to avoid. And if they give us those 2 exact matchups, we'll just take the Eldar because that's a column of red removed, and we'll just move on with our lives and no one else has to deal with Eldar. We'll, pat Lucas on the butt, ask him to score as many points as he can, and just see if he gets a number between 0 and 6. We'll find out later.
Okay. And in this case, Poland attacked with 1,000 Suns, and what was the other army, Pumba?
Custodies, I believe.
That makes sense. And Poland defended with Necrons. You guys attacked with, from what I remember, Chaos Space Marines and Grey Knights.
That sounds right.
And what's the reasoning behind that?
So the reasoning for Chaos Space Marines and Grey Knights is that both of our players there were very comfortable with the archetype of Necrons being played, and they were both very confident that they could put very respectable scores into it. Anthony thought that into Necrons, this mission would be totally fine. There's less places for the Necron players to camp and get points. That gives the Chaos Space Marines more opportunity to concentrate their massive damage output on one exact spot. And Anthony was confident that if he went into the Necrons, he'd be able to kill his way through it. Jack, meanwhile, had played the Necrons game and was likewise very confident that he would be able to get a solid win into this specific Necron build. And same thing, Jack has very few units, so he also thought that this mission would be more favorable than normal for him, and because he has to put his stuff in less spots. So both of our players there thought that they could hit Necrons with, either the right amount of board control or the right amount of damage dealing to win the primary objectives and get very solid scores here. Plus, those were two armies, and this is definitely something to take into account, two armies that weren't super valuable for us down the line. Like, yes, we could try to put our Eldar in, and, Eldar into Necrons is sometimes weird, but it usually works out unless dice get really crazy.
Yeah. This was like the only winning pairing for Anthony, and this was the only winning pairing for Jack as well.
Yeah,
which
yeah,
makes
so
perfect
that's
sense.
We see it as an opportunity to get one of those two players out of the way into what was their best matchup of the 8. Let's get one of those two out, let them cook, see how they do, and we'll work on the rest of it.
And you took T-Sons, which makes sense according to your table because you thought you guys
Absolutely.
were winning this matchup.
We very likely would have accepted the 1,000 Suns almost no matter what was offered, but the fact that it was Custodes made it clear as day to us. Custodes was the hard, we will refuse Custodes no matter what. There was nothing you could do short of a 4-digit bribe that would have gotten us to play the Custodes.
Fair. And then Poland doesn't have T-Sons anymore. You guys do not have orcs. And now moving forward, let me quickly visualize it better. Now it will look probably like you guys lost a lot of good matchups at the same time, but you also cleared yourself out of a lot of not that great of the matchups.
And bluntly, we got what we thought to be a very positive matchup into the Necrons, so that's about as good as it could have gone, especially for an army that did not have a lot of other positive matchups.
Okay. Then in round 2, we will not get into tables. I assume Lucas took more dense table. Yeah. Our Necrons probably took more shooty table. Just guessing, but let's not get into it. That's too much information, I think, at this point.
I agree.
Unless a specific matchup was meant to have very specific table, then you might talk about it, but I don't. But in this case, Poland defended with Custodes, and you guys defended with Deathwatch. Talk me through this choice.
So Deathwatch had turned into one of our, defenders because the Deathwatch wasn't performing as well as we had wanted, which is no shade on the player, just kind of the way it all worked out. Deathwatch wasn't getting great matchups. We also decided that the Custodes didn't really need table choice unless they were going to take the Eldar. And in our experience, the Custodes weren't going to get offered Eldar if they were an initial defender. And I was able to play on basically any other table as long as I wasn't into specifically Wraith Knights. That's the only time I needed to choose a table. So we kind of were accepting that I was no longer really going to be a defender, which was part of our initial plan. And we found that the table choice was helping the Deathwatch to get some points. So we decided, let's defend with Deathwatch here. Same thing, there are 2 reds. We'd love to avoid the reds if possible, but if they give us both reds, getting the Eldar out of the way, again, would just be a clean solution where, yeah, we know it's not going to go great for our Death Watch, but if we get Eldar out of the way before the scrum has begun, we'll probably just call that a day.
Yeah, fair. And then Death Watch was attacked with Tau, Poland, and the other army, I think, was Guard. Pumba, correct me if
I believe so, yes.
Yeah.
It only
That-
makes sense that matchup is
makes the
horrible
decision
for
make
Death Watch. And then you guys, we defended with Custodes, and you guys attacked with Custodes and Knits. So walk me a little bit through your vision of the mirror and Sean's build into Custodes. What was the
Absolutely. So
decision here?
I'll start with Sean. Sean was the obvious one. As soon as we see Custodes, we put NIDS down, no questions asked. And we considered the second army later, but the NIDS were automatic there as far as we were concerned. That's because Sean's tier NID list was designed with several things in mind, because we don't like armies that are a sole purpose counter. If they counter one thing, they'll never get it. But we ended up making a tier NID list. Sean gets most of the credit here. Made a tier NID list that we felt was very positive into Custodes because of specifically the Karn effects with Death Spitters. They're long enough range that they can shoot from outside of the threat range, and then with Old One Eye, they have sustained hits and rerolls to hit, and you end up with a bucket of Strength 7 AP 2 damage one-shots, which happens to be an extremely efficient profile for killing Custodians. Pair that behind a -1 damage monster mash with terrain effects, high saves all around, and Sean had gone into Custodes several times across the tournament and won every single time. That part was guaranteed. From there, we were really looking at what we could put in that we wouldn't feel like we were losing out too much on. Anthony didn't really want Custodes on their table choice. Eldar didn't really want it on their table choice. Lucas obviously wasn't going to get it. Jaime was out. And we thought that it was a little bit of a waste of Genestealer Cult to put them in there. And so looking at what each player had remaining and, kind of based on our own confidence, I basically put the promise down that I would not lose the mirror. I've played the mirror a couple times with Custodes. I have won it to various degrees every time. So I just kind of put a promise down. I said, I'm just going to put myself in. I'll bet on myself. They'll probably take me if they've done the homework on the NIDS. And I'll make sure that we don't throw away something into a Custodes table choice, and I'll get us positive on it.
Okay. And then I think the choice between Tau and Guard was quite obvious. Guard, I think getting more than 0 points would be a good score.
Yeah, we were a little conservative on our matrix with Tau because we hadn't gotten a lot of reps into it, bluntly. But we knew that guards should beat up Death Watch quite thoroughly, and we were not interested in throwing Skark at 20 for free.
Makes perfect sense. So then we get into what you call a scrum. Poland defended with Guard in that step, and you guys defended with Knits. Run me through this decision, because this is certainly dictated by what you see here from the remaining 4 armies.
Yeah, so we were kind of looking through what was left for both sides here, and picking that scrum defender is always so difficult, but we thought that Anthony and Sean were the two people who had reds, and those are things we want to hard avoid. And if we could try to save Anthony by defending him, but there's a chance if things go wrong that Anthony catches the red anyways. So we didn't want to waste our defender slot on a chance of catching a red even, no matter what. So we decided to use our defender slot on Sean to guarantee that we do not have to take another red. Because going into the scrum, our goal is to win the scrum. We feel fine about how everything has gone up to this point, but we don't feel massively confident up to this point, just good. And so our logic was when there's, a couple reds in the scrum, it's fairly likely we're going to take one. If we can avoid it, we will, but it's certainly possible. So at that point, we're going to do everything we can to make sure we don't ever take 2 reds. Because if you take 2 reds in the scrum, then we're not winning the scrum anymore. And that goes against our philosophy. So defend with Sean, guarantee that there's only 1 red on the table. We'll try to avoid it if we can, and if we can't, so be it. But we thought that was the best plan.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense to dodge that one bad matchup. And this way, you guys saw guard as defender. What was your reaction? Probably you were relieved that you didn't defend with Anthony then. Because
Yeah, I assumed it was guard coming. Because I usually look through their side as well, just to kind of make sure there's no unforeseen defender that can screw us over, because they would never do that, but then they do. So we weren't at all surprised when guard got flipped. We thought it made sense. We still were looking at we didn't really want to put Shuckman into guard, even though we thought Eldar could beat guard. We also didn't want to risk it, if it makes sense, because if we thought that once we see guard is down, we know Nids are going to get something. Someone is going to get forgotten, and if we leave, our logic was that if we left Anthony as the forgotten, decent odds he falls into either Eldar or GSC. Terrible. Okay, I'm pretty sure, right, that we attacked the guard with CSM
GSC and CSC. Yes.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, our logic was, let's throw Anthony in just in case they take it. Let's throw GSC in. Either way, these are armies that have access to lone operative stratagems, which we're well aware that this guard list shoots quite hard, and we figured that having access to a lone op stratagem for both of the armies that we attack in kind of reduces the chance of it going horribly. We know that we can still lose to guard, we can beat guard, but we figured that as long as we put in armies that threaten combat with a lone op unit, we could keep the scoreboard close, regardless of how bad it ended up getting. And so mitigating the damage of the guard army was very important to us. Now we have, I know we have Shuckman as green here, higher than Anthony CSM, but we thought leaving Shuckman for Forgotten had less potential downside than leaving Anthony for Forgotten. Was kind of our thought process here.
Yeah, especially if you looked through other games of other teams throughout the event, you could see like Harrison or the Scottish Guard actually drawing against Eldar. Yep. So you know that those matchups could happen. So it makes perfect sense that even though on average you should win against Guard, it can go completely wrong just on few rolls.
Yep. Yeah, because the Scottish Guard player was in fact an American that we lent for the weekend due to an unfortunate sickness on their time. We certainly were getting a guard perspective throughout the event because Ben McJurek, as we were calling him, was still in all of our meetings. Once we determined after the pod stage that we were unlikely to play Scotland, we kept Ben in all of our meetings, giving us a little bit of guard insight whenever he had time.
Fair. So now that all the pairings are done, looking at the estimations, you guys have 3 draws, 1 small loss, 3 wins with 1 sizable one, and 1 roll-off. So I think like that looks decent. Like you go out with 2 wins above the average and 1 roll-off, which is, roll-off.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, after the entire pairings were done, I apologize, I think I cut you off.
No, go on.
Okay. After the pairings were done, as a pairings team, we felt better than average. We definitely didn't come out of this thinking, oh man, we just smoked Poland. We know that not all of the numbers that we have are right. We know that the Polish team is going to make us work and bleed for it. But we thought that the pairings had gone relatively well, better than we had expected. We thought that for the numbers and the matrices we thought that we had come out of it relatively well. We had, we knew that the Eldari coin flip was weird. We knew we didn't really know what was going to happen in the Dark Angel CSM game. Everything else we felt pretty confident about, and we thought that we had mitigated a lot of the potential damage, with the lone exception of the Eldari mirror, which we would just kind of see how that went.
Yeah, you can say that some lists are still favorable, and then fate dice happens. So, okay, so now having all of that, let's switch to the Polish side of how they saw this one evolving. Now you'll get to listen to our Pumba's thinking, Lennon.
I'm very curious to hear it.
So, Pumba, let us run us through your thoughts when approaching the matchup and pairings and stuff.
Yeah. So similarly to USA, we considered custodies to be our defender most of the time. So that was one of the first assumptions about our team composition. We really felt that custodies on their table choice are unstoppable and they could literally fight every single army in the game. So that was very, very valuable. Similarly, our Necrons were also built in mind that there was a decision point actually made during this construction where we were considering a little more offensive build of Necrons that could potentially score higher against certain matchups. However, we decided against that just to secure that second defender slot or another army that could potentially play basically everyone. So our main goal in the pairings process most of the time is actually keeping the pins on the armies we want to pin. What I mean by that is keeping in your hand, as you call it, as we are using cards, keeping in your hand armies that are useful in pinning certain matchups. To give you an example for that, let's look at the CSM from USA and then look at our table. Yeah. So there you can see we have a bunch of draws, some bad matchups that we estimate, but we have two good matchups into the CSM list in our estimation, right? That would mean if I want to keep CSM at bay and don't allow them to actually defend, I would always try to keep elves and GSC. And that's all, of course, only one of the examples given, but basically that follows the reasoning of what we are doing in the pairings process. So if there's a particular army that we want to keep at bay, we would always keep those certain armies in our hand as long as possible. Of course, you need to always adapt your process when it's happening, right? Some of the key things that we figure out before when designing the team comp, and especially during the tournament, it proved to be amazing, is the fact that enemy custodies could not first defend against us particularly well. Because we have that guard list and because we have those dark angels that have proven to be very deadly to other custodies armies, we knew that this basically is not an option, which is huge because that army, in our opinion, especially as we discussed previously, benefits a ton from having the table choice and can open up pairings immensely. And by opening up pairings, I mean they can grab the worst possible army that is offered, say Eldari, and still score some points or like even get Eldari to a draw, maybe a win on their table choice, depending on the mission and roles. So that's a huge asset, and we basically designed our team to mitigate that advantage for other teams.
I assume you
our
also
tau table,
adjusted your estimations to the round played, right?
yes, which is this is exactly what I would want to explain here. Is this table is very much considering the missions. After each single round, we gather in a group to think about every single matchup that we are unsure of from the position of many players in the team, like having their perspective on this, especially considering the mission. Because this one, which was the name just escapes me right now, but this is the one where the center objective basically vanishes of the planet Earth, right? And so we are playing 2 objectives in the midboard, scoring 5 on the midboard, 6 from your opponents, and 2 from yours. This kind of explains our Tau table right here. We really felt, and especially our Tau player felt, that in this particular mission, it's going to be significantly harder for him to score decent primary points because Tau are not as particularly known for holding objectives well in the midboard, and unless you can do that at least one of them, you're going to struggle a lot. Meaning you could probably get your opponent of one of those objectives. Sure, attacking the more defensively placed one, for example, near your opponent's deployment zone, is going to be particularly hard. which oftentimes will actually mean you are scoring 7, your opponent is scoring 7 from primary, and you are scoring usually 2, which over the course of the game will mean a massive difference in the final score, regardless of basically what's happening on the table. So unless the Tau can actually, I don't know, table your opponent, it's going to suffer immensely from the primary difference in this particular mission. So this is why the Tau table here is particularly bad in our opinion, because even though most of the time it can fight Custodies no problem, for example, or it could be very good against Tyranids, it will still struggle on the primary play, and this basically lowers its score significantly.
Because for those listening, watching, this is because Tau gives out so much Bring It Down, and then opponent can take also homers as second fixed secondary, and they will start the game with 35 points from fixed. So it's very good score from the very start, and then you just, unless Tau can get those 35 points, every battle round means one more differential score against Tau. So you usually start the game at like 14-6 Tau.
Exactly, which means the Tau really struggles in this particular mission. So to start the process, we go through our options and our pins. So our comfortable first defender, as we discussed, especially in the pod phase, was Custodies. However, this time we realized, after looking at your guys' scores from previous rounds, we have analyzed them very meticulously, and we did realize that your Tyranids list, designed by and piloted by Sean, and actually your Grey Knights list, can prove to be very difficult matchups for our Custodies. There are some tricks in this list, as you've discussed. The Tyranids list has a lot of tools to actually deal with Custodies. The Grey Knights can really prove, again, because of the mission, can prove to be very difficult, because correct me here if I'm wrong, because this is basically coming off our spying, our estimations, and our play. But we thought one of the ways Grey Knights could play that matchup is actually deep strike like 3 inches from the Custodies in a straight line, literally 3 inches from them. And anytime a unit will move anywhere in those 9 inches, Grey Knight could use a stratagem to either shuffle off or just go into deep strike. Basically, meaning Custodies can never actually push the board in a reasonable pace, actually getting into enemy objectives, which kind of means it's not ideal and it can be very sketchy.
Yeah, that's one of the options we have, because funny enough, it takes Custodies a little longer to kill Grey Knights than they want, and and Grey Knight profiles tend to actually be fine at killing Custodies. So it ended up being very awkward. Jack has played the Custodies matchup with his Grey Knights many times, since of course he and I live in the same town. We played it in person a lot, and then we also happened to put him into it at the previous American team championships a little bit before, to get him some more practice against high quality Custodies players. It's very hard, in our opinion, for Grey Knights to outright win that game, but you also saw that our Custodies was not terribly valuable for us. And so if we can take out a stronger army with a draw with our Grey Knights, who had plenty of pitfalls they had to avoid, we would have accepted that. Call it a 12-8, maybe an 8-12, anywhere in that ballpark is very reasonable. It's very hard for Custodies to push harder than that. Because yeah, if the Grey Knights get close, the Custodies, if they move, they just let the Grey Knights teleport with perfect knowledge. One of the tricks, which I know a lot of people didn't initially catch, was that you can, of course, use the Mist of Daimyo strat to go into reserves. You can also then immediately rapid ingress, same movement phase. So if someone pushes up on us and we'd move, we then just immediately rapid ingress in, just barely out of range of whatever they're going to do, and then we rocket right into them. And it makes it very hard to play with Custodies, even if Custodies don't die that fast. It's a weird one.
Exactly. So this was basically our thought as well. And because of that, we considered, even though our estimation here was a draw, we actually didn't want to get that matchup particularly because we really knew that can be very sketchy and you need to play that game very like perfectly, and that army is just hard to play perfectly against. It has a lot of tricks in its sleeve and it might go sideways. So we want to actually avoid that as much as possible. Because of that, we decided against putting Custodes as our first defender. We didn't want to get pinned by Tyranids and Grey Knights. And we opened up with Necrons, which was our like backup choice, which also in our heads we actually didn't need it that bad, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
Then you get attacked with Grey Knight and CSM. You already knew about the Grey Knight matchup.
Yep. So the important stuff here is the Orc Defender. Whereas we did go over a lot of like permutations of what can happen in the pairings, we didn't really consider that Orc Defender as a first choice, which is actually what happened. Because of that, we had to do kind of improvise on the spot. And the decision between placing down either T-Sons, I mean, Custodes are going into those orcs no matter what. It's just going to happen. It's a very good matchup. You take those. The decision is what actually goes with the Custodes, because that's probably going to get accepted. And the decision was either we came down to the option of either me as T-Sons, and I was not comfortable playing that game, and in the sense that I was supposed to lose that. However, as you can see, my pairings or my estimations rather as T-Sons were not that great, so it's kind of a sacrifice that you don't want to make, but sure. Or we actually considered going with elves here. However, the thing is, getting rid of elves on the first defender step oftentimes means you are going to have a lot of trouble in the scrum, as we have discussed, because that's such a powerful piece that throwing it here into the orcs, especially if our orcs go first in this mission, is actually, I would never consider this to be a 20 ever, or like almost ever, right? So we decided that I'm gonna basically get bust on the orcs, and instead we keep the elves and try to get them a good pairing and keep them as a very useful tool in the later stages.
Yep. Okay.
Yep.
And reasoning between Grey Knight CSM?
So the reasoning because we kind of have this mindset of pins and unpins, we take Grey Knights mainly because it actually allows our Custodes to defend pretty comfortably right now. And this gives us, our Custodes player is very, as another like armies fall through the stages, we realize that unpinning, so to say, the Custodes could actually prove to be very valuable, as you might have to attack it with something that's very much less comfortable than like Grey Knights and Tyranids, right? So it actually like out from all of these armies, I think I would consider all of the matchups to be good on Custodes playable, basically, except from the Tyranids. Mm-hmm. So that basically the choice between Grey Knights and CSM came down to unpinning our Custodes, so they don't ever have to play that matchup.
So you sacrificed yourself, and then you went for a drawish matchup, giving you not a great start, but as it usually happens, defenders are not in a great spot. Then the second part, you guys defended with Custodes against USA Deathwatch. So run me. You just defaulted to Custodes because you unpinned them, or was there something more?
Basically, you can see on the tables as well that defending with Tau is way too sketchy here. because I really believe that if they get attacked with Eldar GSC on this particular mission, they are going as like score a straight up 0, and there's no coming back. And I think avoiding that like actual 0 matchup is crucial. Like getting a straight 0 is just massive. Because of that, as we can see, Custodes matchups are like they are not actually useful as an attacker right now. And as we discussed, the table choice, in our opinion, actually gives them a lot of play into basically everything, right? So they are not necessary for us to have at hand against any particular matchup.
Yeah, and I can imagine you expected Nits to be one of the attackers, and you were quite
Correct.
happy blunting either GC or Eldari, so I expected something else to attack Custodes.
Yeah.
I imagine.
We actually were happy with accepting anything other than Tyranids. However, the fact that you offered a mirror was actually probably the best choice you could have made, right? Because we were really hoping to pin those Custodes matchups in the last stages. As we still had those armies, we were hoping that we could get a very nice matchup over there.
Yeah, that's I didn't quite mention this in mine, so I'll interject a little bit now. That was something we were considering when choosing the attacker. Not only did I think I could do well into the Custodes mirror, or at least guaranteed not, give up any high number, I also was looking at, I didn't first defend because there were a couple too many Custodes counters in the pool, and none of them were getting out of the pool. So as long, the more we get concentrated down to, we start off with, 2 or 3 Custodes counters and 5 armies, then it's 2 or 3 Custodes counters and 3 armies. As much as the first number shrinks, the less comfortable I am. So this was a good safety valve for me, because if you didn't take me, you were taking the Tyranids, and we would be A-okay with that.
Yep, and that made perfect sense from your perspective. That was actually, I was very impressed with that decision. I think like offering up a mirror is never easy, so to speak. Especially the mirrors can go a little bit sideways. I think this one isn't super volatile, actually. I think it oftentimes falls between those 8 to 12, unless something horrific happens. But yeah, that's one of the, actually, in my opinion, less volatile mirror matches you can get. So that was very well played by you. And in terms of the attacker, I mean, we just go with guard because we know that that's probably a 320. And then we know that this isn't going to get accepted, of course. So this allows our Tau to, as you can see, escape from a very bad situation, in our opinion, right? Because we know that this Tau will probably be a problem because of its estimation. Just getting it into a Deathwatch allows it to play for a draw instead of getting probably shafted. And with the possibility, because I really believe that those 2 reds are like straight up 0s every single time.
Okay, so both teams dodging bad matchups.
Exactly.
And we get to the bottom 4 with you guys not having both of those armies, and Deathwatch and Custodes being gone as well. So now getting into the last 4.
Yep. Hello.
Pumba's cat is interrupting us.
She always does this every time I record anything. Yep. So next up, because we realize the Custodes are gone, right? This basically means that our pin of Guard and Archangels is not really useful anymore. We can also see that from our estimation, GSC basically set to smash, which is very comfortable for them. So for us, there's a clear choice between defending with Guard and defending with Dark Angels. Guard, even though it has a lot of bad matchups, we actually think that, as you said previously, that attacking Guard on, even though it's super heavy in artillery, attacking a board can make a choice, especially when playing against, I don't know, Wraith Knights, right? So that guard with table choice is actually not very comfortable to be attacked with Eldari. So actually, we can kind of trust that if we place down guard, as it's no longer useful to us, it's not pinning anything in particular, we can place it down, probably get GSC, Tyranids, CSM, basically anything else. I think even if we take Eldari here, that's like if we got offered Eldari here, I think I would have taken it, because that's such a like huge swing to have in your matrices that I don't think anybody would be comfortable to actually play that matchup as an Eldari player on Guard's table. We also realize Skark is very prepared into GSC. He has played them a ton. I don't think by now he has played any at the actual event, but I might be incorrect here. But I know that
he had not yet, because we were looking for that.
Exactly. But we knew that Skark is very prepared against GSC. He has played that matchup a ton. His list is very much prepared for that matchup, and it's like in more ways that you can imagine. And even though he has that as a orange here, we knew that this is basically considering perfect play by any opponent, right? And there's a lot of tricks that list actually has to deal with GSC, more than you can imagine. So we defend with guard because of that. And you have defended with
Nids,
right?
Yes.
Yeah. So Nids, what we offer Nids is a pretty straight up option, straight up choice here. We just offer you our 2 greens, right? We just go and offer you the ones that we consider to be good matchups. As we will turn out soon, some of them were not actually good matchups, but for now we
didn't
assume.
offer us Eldari.
Oh, that's true. We
You left
offered Dark Angels. That's correct. Interesting. Why did I do that?
We didn't know either. And then I believe we offered CSM as our other one into that card.
Yes. CSM and GSC for sure. And we offer Dark Angels, I think mainly because we don't want them to into GSC or Eldari. Like this increases our options for.
It makes sense in a way that if you knew they would attack with elves, any other pairing they would give, being GSC or CSM or guard, you would get Dark Angel soon.
Yep, exactly. The thing about our elves is Duda, I think, is very much comfortable playing the mirror by this time. His list is very much designed, especially this little guy called I actually forgot. Yeah, the Fugan is actually a nice little piece. I think he was actually very much prepared to play the mirror. I also told both him and Myson, who are our elves and GSC players, that I'm gonna get them in as many mirror matches as humanly possible throughout this tournament. So that they better be prepared for that. Which happened, which turned out nicely for us. But still, in terms of picking what to choose for the guard matchup, as we've said and as I've discussed, I'm picking GSC. Your GSC is right now a definite problem for us. I much rather get it here for the guard to deal with. This actually feels like the best matchup that the GSC can fall into. Which also is what's worth mentioning. I believe that Leshu said to me during our pairings process that he's kind of like this. I think the comments are actually not here, but what we do is usually when filling our matrix is every player leaves some notes, like to comment on like specific tables that
A
they
lot
want to
of
get.
notes.
Exactly, a lot of notes. Leshu into CSM basically suggests that this should be still good. Like this is a draw, but probably better than your usual draw, right? So I treat it a little bit like a small win in that sense. This way, like our Dark Angels, so to speak, escape from bad matchups like Eldari, Tyranids, and GSC. Our guard takes GSC, which he's prepared for, and the Eldari go fuck themselves in the middle. So overall, bad. Actually bad. I think we didn't. I think the problem that's turned out like throughout the pairings just came up right away, in that we should have considered Orc Defender to be more of an option for you guys. And because we didn't, and we had to try to improvise a solution for that problem on the spot, we didn't have enough time to consider what was the optimal solutions, like not just on the spot, but throughout what's going to happen in the next steps of doing the pairings. Like it doesn't look horrible just from the estimations, but it's definitely the worst that we've done. Like after every other pairings process, we are very confident in our estimations and what came out of them. This one felt like we are on the losing side of a draw, something like that, right?
Yeah, I mean, you just have to look at it. That's Polish estimations and USA estimation, and you see that when we were mentioning this, Poland is losing by 1, and USA was like winning by 2 and having a flip according to your estimation. So it looked like a positive for USA and a slight negative for Poland after all. Overall. So now that you both gave your point of views, maybe now that Pumba explained everything, you want to follow on something, John, about the Poland, maybe anything about the estimations, anything that caught your eye?
Not really. The main thing that I was kind of listening to here, honestly, was your talk about keeping pins. We did like to keep a few pins intact, but we didn't try to pin everything. Really, if I'm being honest, the only army that we ever like put full priority into we're going to pin this was GSE. GSE was the main opponent that, because going into WTC there is a community and meta perception, even though it has changed a little bit over the last couple of weeks, that GSE and Eldar were the top two, and then of course, not every country brings every top army. We figured everyone would have GSE and Eldar, and so a large part of our process that I hadn't touched on yet was that we were considering ourselves an anti-Genestealer cult team. And it kind of came to my mind when you all were talking about how you were relatively well set up for Custodes, which was certainly something that I felt the first time I opened your lists on BCP. I felt targeted. But I just kind of wanted to mention that we definitely felt that we were set up for Genestealer cult. And so that was something that we were trying to keep relatively intact during our process. The one thing that we kind of threw as the wrench was our Orc Defender, because that is part of our Genestealer cult pin. But we kept several armies in the Genestealer cult pin so that we could lose any one of them and still be intact.
Yeah, but I was also watching your pairings against Sweden, and even though you didn't defend with orcs, there was a pattern that your first defender could play GSC, your second defender was usually Deathwatch or something that won against GSC, and then you third defended with Nits, which was bad for GSC. So GSC needed to defend, but then they would get pinned, so they needed to attack something, so they couldn't attack any of your defenders, so it'd be left to the remaining 2 pairings. Their last remaining pairings, usually, unless they tried like attacking GSC into one of your matchups. So suddenly they would have only like one good escape, and unless they knew that you're gonna do it and escape like the very first time they could, they were bound to lose.
Exactly. And the other thing that we were looking at was that the only time that you could really safely defend with Genestealer cult against us was in the scrum, but no one knows that until after we've all flipped our cards. and that's a little extra step. Yeah, the safest thing to do with Genestealer Gold is defend in the scrum with them, but that's so against what Genestealer Gold are supposed to be for the team that we didn't think anyone would.
And also you needed to know like nits counter GSC, for example.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, we assumed everyone knew that. We thought that was obvious.
No.
I'm kidding, of course.
Anything on your end, Pumba? Anything that caught your eye?
In terms of estimations, I think that the table against Necrons just feels wrong to me. Especially like I never imagine, like, I get that some armies can definitely win against Necrons, but I think it's very hard to actually outscore them to an extent that you are scoring big.
Yep.
As we have designed this list to be very like defender heavy, pick your board, play with anything list kind of list. I think that this side of the table is doesn't reflect reality. Let's call it that. It's just wrong in my opinion.
Fair. We didn't take Necrons because we were having a lot of trouble having Necrons putting up results in our practice games, where a lot of our team was repeatedly beating Necrons. Now, obviously, we can look at the actual results of this round, which I'm sure we'll be discussing soon, and see that perhaps our some of our matrix numbers were a little bit aggressive. But we had done a lot of practice into Necrons, and we're just continuously not super happy with them.
I think it was the same thing in Poland with CSM, right?
Exactly. Like, we didn't take CSM because in our practice, they didn't really feel great. Like, we were very much consistently beating them. We didn't feel that the army delivered so much. And this is kind of a thing that's worth, I think, mentioning, that even though you've got insane amount of hours put into like estimating what the meta is going to be, what armies are actually good, as many, like, you actually play games with them, and still you might find out that some people or some other team finds something that you didn't, and it happens constantly. Especially when the meta is new and the decision is new, you will not find everything. Like, I think the biggest example of that for us was your orcs list. Actually, I think that list just is amazing. It's so simple yet so like incredible at what it's supposed to do.
Yeah.
So, like, we when doing our preparations and considering which armies should we bring, we just never found this idea. So all the testing against orcs we did was basically against the list, or like using the list that were similar to what other countries brought, right? And we had basically no problem beating them. And because that list actually differs so much from that norm, let's call it, we were not expecting it to perform as well as it did. Other than that, I think I've already mentioned that to Anthony when he showed me that table. As you've discussed previously, that if you see any like opponents' armies just having straight up draws from top to bottom, you can probably expect that nobody knows what the fuck is going on, and this is the case against the Dark Angels.
Yeah, I knew what it was doing. I played a lot of Dark Angels in the lead up, but then I stopped playing them when I got assigned to Custodes at the 11th hour, because I was not initially going to be a Custodes player. But I never played that style of Dark Angels. I had tried out the we call it the Harm Assist and the Aggressors. I had tried that out in an Ultramarine list. I had never thought to put the Land Raider Redeemer down because it didn't click to me that it helped 14 models and that a normal Land Raider helped 12. And I was, the second I see it, I'm like, does it actually? And then, part of my brain was like, well, in 5th edition, it held more guys. And I was like, yep, sure enough, it works. But that's something we completely missed until it went live.
Yeah. So I think this WTC basically proved that nobody's going to ever have the full solution to the problem. Just other answers to it.
Yeah.
what we of course like completely missed, and which was the biggest blunders in our estimations, was the Tyranids the Tyranids counter GSC. Like we had completely just this as a blind spot, and we had no clue that this is going to happen, right? We had that as a positive matchup in our estimations, and because we followed it to the conclusion, right? You sometimes make decision based off that particular matchup being good, right? You sacrifice some other things, you make other decisions. Suddenly, if that flips on your head, as it did in this case, you are in trouble, right? So because basically our only definite positive matchup turned out to be wrong, right?
And two of our positive matchups ended up being quite inaccurate as well.
Right.
Yeah, I think there are 4 games marked as positive matchups between the two teams, and one of those came remotely close to the Matrix.
That was Pumbas.
So like considering your estimations, our estimations, and then the results, you can see that nobody knows anything, and Warhammer is made up.
Yeah, none of us are.
I think is the conclusion. I think we all knew that orcs are good against Thousand Suns, which actually is completely wrong as well, because just the next round, Vic has proven that we all know shit. So that is actually also wrong, which is I'm bad at it, cannot play Thousand Suns, and nobody besides Vic apparently or Arne can play Thousand Suns. So that's also wrong, even though it's
not mentioning
right
Liam VSL. That's
no, we're not. We're not.
oh, okay. Good.
Certainly, none of us
We
can
just
play.
we just decide to ignore it, right? So our estimations, I think, overall were closer, but still wrong as fuck. So nobody knows anything about Warhammer.
Yep.
Yeah, I think nothing was correct except the Custody's mirror.
Let's go.
Woo!
And the one thing that struck me when I look at the estimation was that the Eldari mirror do the estimate as a draw, which I find very surprising.
I think
like that one is just yeah.
I cannot comment on it. Like genuinely, I need to. I have enough trust in his ability to estimate that pairing against an army that he knows himself so well that even though in the depths of my heart, I would say, yeah, that's a mirror, like that's a flip, that's a fucking 20-0 roll sometimes. However, I think that he also like I've watched him play so many times with like the old Eldar and like Chaos Knights at the last WTC. I think people underestimate how defensive you can be in central matchups. Sometimes when you see those mirrors and you think of them as being completely roll off, sometimes with a certain mindset in mind and some tech pieces, I think you can play them defensively enough that it can actually turn into a draw. So I think that was the idea here. In terms of how this game ended up being a 17-3, I have no clue.
Yeah.
Some elf magic, fate dice, devastating ones. I don't fucking know. We won.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know.
Yeah, I didn't have time to ask about that game until after the event, and then as soon as the event was over, I realized, oh, I actually don't care about Eldar mirrors. So
yeah, exactly, right?
Yeah,
let them play it.
I saw the number. We planned for Sunday with that number in mind, and then after Sunday, I was like, I never want to hear about Eldar again. I don't care what you did. I don't care what he did. I'm not going to play against Eldar for another 2 months.
Exactly.
Yeah, I haven't played against Eldar since WTC. I'm going to keep that streak going as long as I can.
So playing teams only.
Hopefully not soon. Hopefully soon it will be okay, right?
Yeah. Thursday, according to Warhammer Community.
Right?
Hopefully.
Surely it's going to be okay. I would like to believe that.
Yeah, emergency
right. So basically what we learned
previous...
today is nobody knows anything in Warhammer, and estimations are made up. Just use a D8. We tried that, by the way.
I think, to be fair, this was very specific year for it. I think next year, when we'll have way more time to get familiar with the addition, with the armies, even if we get another curveball of balance patch 2 weeks before the this submission like it happened in 2022. I still imagine that the next year people will be more on point with the estimations. This year was very special with not having enough time to test more armies, and also with the fact that you only had 2 weeks since the submission to the event to play test opponent armies, which I think will not be a thing next year, where there will be a month earlier. Maybe you will not have pods. Maybe pods will be submitted as this year, like 2 weeks before, not way earlier, but it will still give you time to figure out armies, which wasn't a thing this year. And there were plenty of upsets and stories about armies overperforming because people just didn't have time to realize what they were doing. And when they realized, they found out.
Yeah, I think every single team had at least one army that they wish they'd had more time on. For us, at least in the US, also the armies being released closer to the event is actually, we think that it's a big disadvantage to us, because to offset the time changes, and a disadvantage we think to most of the countries that live far away.
Non-Europeans.
Exactly, because the weekend before WTC for us is a travel weekend. It's not a Warhammer weekend. So I, as a matter of fact, in between the lists releasing and me getting on a plane, I did not have time to play a single game of Warhammer against a WTC list. So I just, unfortunately, due to the timing of that, and then once I was there, I was on vacation with my partner. So I was not on vacation to play Warhammer until Thursday.
Yeah. I think what also is shown here, like in this whole process, is the fact that throwing something unorthodox in your team composition is very valuable. Like it matters here, of course, in the WTC context, in the new edition context, and you might consider everything to be kind of meta until the meta is developed. But I think even if you have kind of a more stable meta, even then, I think having something unorthodox that is designed to counter certain lists, especially in team environments, something that people are not used to, can make a huge difference. Like catching those swing matchups, right? Because from our perspective, the US had the only team comp that we were, I think, like almost only team comp that we were wrong about in our estimations. This was because of the combination of the orcs, the Tyranids, and the GK. All of those armies we needed basically to scout for and kind of make an idea how they are supposed to work at the event or in front before the event. And you cannot do that with every single army on this event, with every single top team that is coming, right? So throwing something like that clearly benefits you, because, well, while we realize that GK is good into custodies, for example, and Tyranids are good into custodies, we just missed the fact that Tyranids counter GSC, right? So I think having something unorthodox, something that just is supposed to be different from the meta that's currently like reigning, is very good in teams. This was actually one
there
of
were
the main reasons.
Yeah, I was saying that I think there were plenty teams that missed like one army or undervalued one army because they had a player that was trying that army that probably tried wrong version of that army, and you dropped that army early from consideration. Like in Poland, you guys dropped Nits quite early. Like maybe not very
We
early, but
especially dropped orcs quite early. I think that was the biggest one. Like that was basically like a week into the edition that we considered like orcs are not getting into the team.
And John, you said that you guys dropped the Necrons quite early as well, right?
Yeah, we tested Necrons a lot. We just we found that with the players who we considered automatic for their armies, and then the players who were still deciding, we did not like Necrons at all. Whenever we tried to put them on the table, we were unimpressed. Admittedly, we didn't think that we had a natural born great Necron pilot. We didn't have a long-time Necron player as our Necron player, but we had a couple people try them. a couple people be unimpressed. And at the end of the day, we decided crons were not worth trying to force the issue on. If we didn't like it, we didn't like it. Let's not put someone in who's going to not feel confident.
Fair.
Yeah. On the topic of like unorthodox choices, I think one of the the main reasons when we were deciding between the Dark Angels and the Death Watch was literally, I mean, everybody's gonna have Death Watch, so let's not bring that.
That's fair.
Even though it might answer something, I think just having, if they have very similar estimations across the board, just picking something different is a value of itself.
Yeah.
And I think that showed.
Yeah, that's completely fair. Completely fair.
Anything else you want to touch upon? Anything else you guys want to add? Maybe you have some questions that weren't answered at that after party.
There were a lot of questions asked back then, but no, I think I'm good.
Yeah, I think I'm set.
Okay. So Dan, thank you very much for joining me in this dissection of the pairings. I find it always interesting when you get two teams that after the round they both realize that they were very much wrong. I just love that it happens nearly every round, nearly every time, even when you have a very mature edition like previous years WTC. So it's always interesting to see the different point of view. But thank you very much for showing all of this. I don't think we care at all about people knowing the thought processes because it all comes down to the information game. I'd say that 40K is a game of information when it comes to teams. And this was a clear example of no one having this correct information, but everyone had some. Whether it was good, that's questionable. But thank you very much. And for those that were listening on Spotify, if you wanna, or any other podcast platforms, if you wanna see the estimations and the whole process, you can jump on YouTube and see everything step by step, or you can just pause and read all of it to get whatever insights you want. So thank you, John and Pumba, for joining me, and see you in the next one.
All right.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Bye.
And now for the awkward 20 seconds of StreamYard.